The idea behind blockchain is that it can bring all participants across a network, so this could be a supply chain, together to share and collaborate around certain pieces of information or data that pass through that chain. Now, an example of that is a shipload of wheat, right? So it obviously begins at the paddock. We could have information about that wheat as it's been grown in the paddock posted to the blockchain. We could create a digital asset that represents that wheat as it sits in the paddock, and we could continue adding to that as the wheat actually progresses through the supply chain until it's actually a shipment of wheat going through to a consumer. So, in essence, the idea of a blockchain is to actually use a technology, and we might get into talking about what that technology is later, but a technology that is actually built for a distributed network, across that distributed network, to bring all of those participants together to a single source of truth.
So for a participant, let's say a farmer,
Yep.
what difference will that make between how things are now and what sort of world you're imagining in, say, 3 years' time, when blockchain has really transformed the transaction of a commodity supply?
Look, I think one of the key areas for farmers and indeed for all sellers throughout the supply chain will be speeding up payments. So actually reducing the amount of settlement time, the latency that sits within the supply chain. So that's one of the key benefits that this blockchain technology or set of technologies can confer. And the reason for that is because we can exchange value instantaneously on a blockchain. So in some parts of the globe, they actually call it the Internet of Value. And that's one way to think about it.
I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about attaching title very securely to digital title very securely to a physical asset.
Yes.
We can kind of imagine that with Bitcoin, which I guess is where blockchain originated, because it's a dollar goes into the system and you can then convert that at the end. But we're talking an actual physical transfer of grains of volumes of wheat or other commodities. So we don't convert them into digital, but we have a parallel digital chain along the way, don't we?
That's exactly right, Daryl. So we're actually talking about creating a parallel digital economy, if you like, that sits alongside what's happening in the physical world. And we have to tie the two together. And there's different ways that we do that. One of those is through Internet of Things, so those sorts of physical monitoring or geographic devices that tell us where something is located or what quality it is. And this is actually not part of blockchain per se. So blockchain is in fact a single piece of technology, but the value that's going to come to farmers and others is probably going to come through a set of technologies that's built around the blockchain.
Now, what will it take to make all of that happen?
That's a really good question. So what we've been seeing is a lot of experimentation in the marketplace, a lot of piloting, a lot of POCs, as they call them, proofs of concept, but we're not seeing that much in production, or not least in our industry, in agriculture and in food systems. So one of the reasons for that is that this technology, once again, works across a network. So we need all of those network participants to start moving on to that technology. And that is a real challenge. It's a very real issue. If we actually think of blockchain and just for a moment substitute it with a piece of hardware, say a mobile phone. If I have a mobile phone, that can be the best technology in the world, but if only I have it, it's not particularly useful. If we all have it, all of a sudden, there is a great utility across the network, but it takes time for that to happen, and we have to think about the incentives and the broader uses of a mobile phone in that instance, or of blockchain, in order to get participation across the network. So one of the ways that we've been looking at approaching this problem from an agri-digital perspective is to actually put out an application layer into the marketplace straight away. So we've put a digital commodity management platform that tracks the physical commodity from the farm all the way through to the consumer. Out into the marketplace, we've got a number of users. So we've got 1,750 active users and another 5,000 casual users on that platform. The idea would be that as that blockchain technology matures, that we're able to put that application and rest it on top of this blockchain. And we then move the whole network across to being able to use the blockchain more effectively than if we were trying to accrete one customer or acquire one customer at a time.
So you've got the platform that is effectively blockchain ready, waiting for, it's an active platform, but effectively it's waiting for the blockchain technology to come into play.
That's exactly right. So behind the scenes, we've been doing really heavy experimentation ourselves with a variety of different blockchains. We've mainly worked with Ethereum and Quorum, which are two variants of blockchains or distributed ledgers. And we're at the stage now where we will have an MVP in market later this year, and we'll be commercializing a protocol that sits on top of a blockchain, which is really focused around the trade and finance of agri-commodities. And so then if you think about this as a stack, like a building, level one, ground floor might be the internet in this example. Then we've got the blockchain on top of that. We then have a commercial protocol such as we're developing, which is focused around the use case of agri-commodities. And then we have an application layer, and that's the platform that we've already got in market. So there's a few things that need to come together in order to make this happen, but that's not unusual in technology.
So what's your story? How did this come about for you?
Well, about 2.5 years ago, we started AgriDigital. I've got two co-founders as well. We're all farmers. These days I'm married into it, so not a farmer by background myself. But the reason that we were drawn to begin AgriDigital was that we've all worked in agri-supply chains. We understand that there are complex problems that affect supply chains globally, and suddenly we could see that there was a technology or an emerging set of technologies that could be used to solve those problems. And we were just drawn to being able to do that. We knew that we had the right experience in terms of clear domain expertise within agricultural supply chains, and that we could apply that using technology.
What do you think this world of agricultural commodity trading will look like in 5 years' time?
Yeah, well, there's a classic Bill Gates quote that, we overestimate what we can do in 2 years and we underestimate what will happen in 10 years, right? So, your question sits fairly in the middle there, and I've got to get my crystal ball out. My notion is that within 5 to 10 years, I think we will see some pretty fundamental changes actually in the way that goods are traded, in the way that we think about assets, and that we'll actually be regarding them as both physical and digital assets, and they may have a separate value even. One of the great things that blockchain can provide, I think, to supply chains in particular, is not just traceability, which we've heard so much about, but the ability to introduce more liquidity into the supply chain, and liquidity from different areas. So with a blockchain, you can transfer value very quickly and very cheaply, as I said, and that could mean that instead of having to buy 1 ton of wheat, I could buy 1 grain, or I could fund 1 grain. So that's called fractionalization, and that's my hit prediction for one of the big areas of impact that will happen in the trade space.
Wow. Emma, thanks very much for speaking to us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks very much.